Your Eminences, Reverend Fathers, dear ladies and gentlemen, delegates, the topic, based also on instructions given us by Father Stavros, our moderator, coordinator, and we thank him for that and the invitation, along with His Eminence Cyril of Rhodes. So the topic is laconic presentation of how Greek military staff experienced campaigns, three instances in particular of the overcoming of the psychological pressures of war, coming from priests who went with the troops to the front. The first thing we need to be clear on is terminology. So here's a list of terms sourced from the newly put together campaign manual of the military headquarters on mental health at war. You find it is a compendium of information. Now, therefore, I will be alluding to quotes, but not read them. You'll see them on the screen. We shall focus on anecdotal witness first. Face to face with the war, Priest Kallimachos, the first director of the National Herald, the paper in New York, he talks of conditions on the battlefield. He laments the tragedy of war and the inhumanity of war, a source of stress, and several other consequences. I became insensitive gradually, finding myself before corpses, brains, faces destroyed, bellies opened up, entrails on the ground, the result of what is a blemish on our civilization, namely war. How can it be that fighters don't get the shock of their lives when they come against such images? And you can see what I'm talking about in the figures too. Now, I know I'm going a bit fast, but bear with me. You can study the paper. We've given it to the Secretariat. It could be that such experiences make people dysfunctional and cause psychopathological complaints that put to risk human persons with collapse. Those wartime conditions, responses and reactions differ from person to person, depending on a number of factors, that will lead to positive or adverse reactions. Vulnerabilities and the pros, let's call them. We'll talk about how these circumstances were dealt with. One way was to supply a positive meaning to the war struggle. Dimitrios Kallimachos, our priest, says that love for the motherland and care for our sorely tried Macedonian brethren, as seen by someone from mainland Greece who had joined the forces at the front, meant that people became inured to the horrors, even at the prospect of being killed themselves. An instance corroborating this view is a letter we found on the body of a slain soldier. It's 2 days, my lovely Vasilikula, my wife, that we are at war. We have been hit by missiles for 2 days long. Yanis was hit on the head by my Vasiliki. I'm going to be lost to you for the sake of the motherland. This village of Kherkida that we seek to conquer is going to be steeped in blood. No matter, Vasiliki, don't weep for me. I don't want you to lament my loss, because what we're doing has to be done. For us here, the Bulgar slayers, the avengers of all the dishonorable things they perpetrated on our Macedonian brothers, I embrace you, my lovely Vasiliki, signed Andreas. Then the second factor is the fighter's personality, especially when melded with ecclesial approach. In one instance, we find this sense of heroism and abnegation during the battles, seeing with mine own eyes and sensing the heroism and self-abnegation of our soldiers, I was absolutely at a loss to understand how people of no educational background could possibly be impelled by such ideals. Well, it's up to faith in God, an angel-like life, feeling of contrition over one's failings, an asceticism in the way of life, a fiery, fervent love for the motherland. That is the makeup of Greek soldiers. The motherland needs to maintain this outlook and preserve it and foment it. And finally, one further factor showing how needful your network is, Father Stavros, is the protective armor that a church community can supply to a fighter. one such need for the network to fill is to stand by the soldier. You hear them tell, a day in 1913, the priest came and hallowed us. Praise the Lord. I will be ready to die. I will be shriven. And it was a good idea for the Metropolitan of Athens to have sent chaplains to the battlefront. Those chaplains also were a stopgap to putting an end to any propensity for extreme behavior on the part of soldiers, going on a rampage or looting or whatever. Hear this, some soldiers have looted two villages, Michlovo and Kirnovo, Bulgarian villages, and they indulge in orgies, literally raping women and young girls, causing much lamentation. And then something happened that brought the Greek fighter to a very high point. Those on the chiefs of staff had no idea what was happening, and then there was this group of soldiers that came and confessed to me, very worried, that we are going to lose our courage on the battlefield because some of the mule drivers who are never to be seen on the front line are indulging in orgying, and they are giving us a bad name. God doesn't like this behavior. Why are we being deprived of our honor in this way? And the captain or major, whatever it was, used his crop against those mule drivers. And the three chaplains drafted a report to the division as in the form of a complaint and representation against such goings on. Ultimately, the network of protection spreads beyond the battlefield, not only in psychological or conceptual terms. Commander Faustinis prepared the ground for the souls of these fighters, that they might see to supporting the families that had lost their relations on the battlefield. I advise them, he says, not to be remiss in the single most significant duty. They need to visit the parents of the casualties. There will be some women in black there. They are widows. Of those people who stood guard for our country. And he exhorts the troops to behave in a way that will palliate the pain and anguish felt by those slain heroes. In a very literary extract of some length that proves the necessity, the needfulness of this network of the Ecumenical Patriarchate for healthcare ministry. And therefore, please accept our grateful thanks for all you do. Thanks also for your patience.
Thank you, Steve. Dear Eminence, Reverends, dear delegates. First, let me thank Father Stavros Kofinas and his wonderful family for this invitation and their organization on this conference. After having been a commanding and operation officer in 2018, I became the first military coordinator of the Belgian military chaplaincies. And I got so passionate about their work and specific mission that I totally reoriented myself professionally and also became a researcher on that field. As you said, Steve, thank you. It's a great privilege for me to tell you today for a few minutes about the role of military chaplaincies, highlighting the work in operations. Military chaplains have similarities and analogies with other types of chaplaincies, those of prisons and hospitals, but still have their own unique characteristics. Although there are some difference between different NATO and European countries, a military chaplain generally serves the entire military organization and follows military personnel throughout the whole professional career and all walks of life. A military chaplain represents both her religious, philosophical tradition or affiliation, but acts in a pluralistic and a neutral environment. In many countries, a military chaplain is therefore required to collaborate and to interact with mental health professionals, psychosocial actors like social workers, and has to be able to advise the command at all levels of military echelons. While respecting the constitutional principles, for example, the separation between state and church, specific to each society, professional military chaplaincies are in most cases completely integrated into military institution and living space of the armed forces. Despite the fact that a chaplain has a double loyalty and double legitimacy, both for church, religious institution, and for the state, the nation, he or she is not part of the hierarchical line and keeps a meta position within the armed forces. In Germany, military chaplains are described by the researcher as both being critical of and at the same time in solidarity with the organization. In addition to being an interface between state, church, and army, they symbolize and maintain the bridges between civil society and the military. They also connect the people from different faith communities. Aware that every soldier is a citizen and that every citizen may one day to be called upon to defend her country, they are thus in a position to formulate ethical considerations on the specific role of the military in our world. Most armies today, although they are much more professional and open organizations, retain institutional traits of total, I'm not saying totalitarian, total institution, and that is covering almost all aspects of a soldier's life. Therefore, military chaplaincy represents moral compasses and the collective conscience on the armed forces. In this sense, military chaplains offer a space for speech, for expression of emotion, feelings, and deep thoughts, where soldiers can connect to the citizen and human nature and or with the divinity, depending on the affiliation. They create this Andersort, for those who speak German, and another place, the in-between, where the soldiers can breathe, slow down, and step back for a moment from the events they are involved in. Indeed, when a military performs his tasks, it goes very, very fast. The execution of military tasks often consists of the direct and sometimes too rapid application of orders. The mission must be accomplished regardless of the circumstances. Another specificity of the military lives is that it imposes to the soldiers to transit between different ways of living, thinking, and functioning, but also between numerous clusters of private and military life. Very often, this is accompanied by cognitive dissonance and can raise important existential questions. For the young generation, like mine, problems are often linked to the balance between private and professional spheres. Military chaplains assist military personnel in resolving cognitive dissonance and help develop cognitive agility and flexibility, while orient them within their own religious, moral, philosophical reference systems. After the fall of Berlin Wall, the operational engagement paradigm has changed. Most NATO and European armies have professionalized and can now quickly be deployed anywhere in the world with interoperable modules tailored to the mission and to the specific objectives. One of the main characteristics of the actual operation environment is described by acronym VUCA, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So very changing. The military must juggle between peace, combat, and control operations. On the same day, a soldier may operate in all kinds of operational frameworks. Moreover, one of the major particularities is the fact that cognitive warfare and psychological operations, using strategic means of communication like fake news, have become central to every operation. This can be seen in the current conflict in Ukraine. So the military must therefore evolve in hybrid warfare using conventional and unconventional means in a very unstable and changing environment. In this chaos, the military chaplaincies can provide space and time for reflection, contemplation, meditation, and self-reflection. On operational deployments, such as peacekeeping missions, without much exposure to the life-threatening events, this cognitive dissonance may appear less significant, as the soldiers are integrated in an all-encompassing military environment, governed by the rules of engagement, in a lifestyle punctuated by military routine and operational obligations. As in the homeland, in barracks, they are there to perform, so the chaplains, the ministry of presence and listening at all times. But above all, the role of military chaplains is then to represent a meaningful core as a legitimate reference for particular and moral questions, but above all, to respond to specific needs like the celebration ceremonies. What does Elisabeth Martin say, one of our Belgian humanist chaplains, about her work? She has been deployed with the first troops sent to Romania after the 24th February. I often say that our job is to walk through the halls with a cup of coffee in hand, doing drills or hikes with new recruits, and to get to know each other and us. because it's necessary to build trust so that soldiers who feel they need to do so will then push the door of our office, even in a few months or years later. So most of my time is to build relationships. You can see her picture on the slide. In some countries, military chaplains even play a role in maintaining spiritual fitness in their holistic approach of health before, during, and after operational deployment. Finally, there's also some thoughts that the military chaplain is a strategic asset in military operation, a capacity considered as a weapon system. I won't elaborate more on that. I'll let you think if it's a good approach or not. In the case of exposure to traumatic events, accidents in operations, or combat, military chaplains play a significant role in preventing the development of PTSD. In this context, they are called upon to collaborate with other mental professionals. Even if in treatment of PTSD, the role of military chaplains is not always recognized before a very large evidence-based research on this, the accompaniment of personnel who are between life and death or facing a tragedy or extreme circumstances is devolved to chaplains. They respond to the urgent need to be confessed, to be consoled, to be reassured. A soldier then becomes a patient, and the chaplain assures her role of healthcare chaplain, where the spiritual dimension has its full place. But of course, the needs of military personnel who have and had experience not only of combat, but also of homicide and are specific, and the moral dilemmas as well as spiritual wounds can be deep and long-lasting. Several recent studies highlight different psychometric traits to spirituality, which can be assessed. A spiritual distress would be then meaningless or sense of futility in life and work, acting and interacting in ways that do not align with the highest personal values and beliefs, neglecting important relationships and becoming self-centered, hopelessness or giving up on dreams and ambitions, unable to forgive self or others for real or perceived failures and betrayals. In this context, scientific research is looking at the difference in impact of the mental health of military personnel according to the type of events to which they have been exposed. A distinction between life-threatening, combat, and unjust war events are currently being studied. The outcomes of the exposure to the unjust war events on mental health are not automatically predicted in advance, as the military do not ask themselves about the justification of the war. The awareness and questioning may come at the time of the execution of the mission, for example, when the order comes and is given to torture prisoners of war or kill civilians. As agents of peace and not theologians of war, military chaplains are a priori not be called upon to justify or not justify war in operations in the name of religious or political ideology or government imperatives. The role of military chaplain is to continue to provide pastoral and spiritual care to the soldier, offering a space for ethical questioning, bringing him or her into the kairos. The goal is not to remove feelings of guilt, shame, anger, and to strengthen the resilience of the combatant, but to prevent dehumanization and destruction of the identity. A quote from an Ukrainian military chaplain who is now in the field. The main job of the military chaplain is saving humanity of our warriors. Victory for us is not just kicking out the aggressor from our land, but also creating a society where a person feels one's own freedom and dignity, and where a human being remains a human being. The army is a representative sample of our society.
It encounters the same issue that make the news in the civilian society. We face the same issue of resilience. At COVID, the major concern of this pastoral ministry was to restore hope. Even if the crisis management is the core business of the soldiers, their private lives were so impacted by COVID that they had difficulties functioning normally. Finally, I would like to read aloud some passages from the experience report of a young chaplain, Hans van Wichelen, who has just returned from Romania, which describes the current reality of their work on the field. The eve of my departure for the mission trip to Romania felt like I had a knot in my stomach. I was sitting on the table with my wife, Gael, and my 2 sons for dinner. Then during the flight, every second I enjoyed that view, but it also reminded me of my family. I was on my way to Romania for 5 weeks. 5 weeks, it's not long. The engineering battalion will stay there for 4 months. But I had a lot of questions. What are these men and women of this battalion? What do they expect from me? What can I offer them? Am I going to be able to add value for them? Still, in the beginning, I felt a bit strange because you don't know everyone yet. As the days progressed, I developed a better and better relationship with the military. The first department I went to visit was the William to join us. I saw some wooden beams there and asked, can I make a cross of this? The next day, the big cross was finished, and so I put together a small challenge. The idea was to use the 40 kilograms cross to complete a 6-kilometer way of cross. It was a very big success. Being present with the soldiers made me feel like one of them. Yet I also tried to keep my distance because after all, I am a chaplain. You are not 100% one of them. However, everyone treated me as I was one of them. That made me feel at ease. Every day I had a conversation with a number of soldiers, and sometimes there were also conversations that were requested in advance, related to family situation, but sometimes personal matters, career-oriented questions, and faith issues. As a concluding remark, I would like to say this. Today, in the face of nuclear threats, the role of military chaplains might be to bring hope in times of the anxiety-provoking events and images of atrocities of war. Also to seek to respond to the global challenges of our humanity, and again, to maintain hope by seeking ways to restore these broken connections between humanities. How not to develop destructive resentment after all what happened. That will be the focus after the war. But also how to prevent ideological radicalization caused by fear and self-enclosure. From this point of view, military chaplains remain first choice interlocutors for military authorities, notably by being mediators in the management of religious and philosophical diversity. Being able to evolve while safeguarding one's identity in a pluralistic, multidisciplinary, interconvictional, and interprofessional environment. Without forgetting the notions of charity, empathy, and love, which remained the essence of the Ministry of Military Chaplaincy. Military chaplains are and remain brightening lights in dark moments. In that way, they're ministering to whole mankind, and they take care so of the mankind of tomorrow. Thank you.
Your Graces, Reverend Fathers, Reverend Sisters, brothers and sisters. Now, after having focused on the assistance that is given pastorally to the military that are on the war field, we switch our attention to the refugees that are among the victims of wars. And what I'm going to do is to bring you the experience, our limited experience as parish priests, when we were faced with the flow of refugees coming from Ukraine to Belgium. We were lucky as a parish because we have a number of Ukrainian parishioners, and these parishioners, through social media, were connected with family members and with old friends, and there was an immediate response in terms of hospitality to those people. For example, here you see our parishioner, one of our parishioners, hugging an old school friend that was met by her at the border between Germany and Belgium. She welcomed her and her kids and grandchildren in her home, and they are still there waiting for the war to finish. And of course, after crossing the border between Ukraine and Poland, the refugees had to face a number of turmoils, which are essentially standing in long lines day and night to acquire the status of refugees, and sleeping in train stations and many other issues. The parish of the Holy Apostle Andrew in Ghent is a parish that is formed, includes Orthodox parishioners of many countries, including Russians and Ukrainians. And I have to say that from our parish there was a spontaneous, immediate response to this crisis, and parishioners themselves, without us asking anything, volunteered and started immediately to respond to the crisis. And as a personal initiative of many parishioners, blessed initiative, a minivan was rented, and parishioners, a couple of our parishioners drove to the border between the European Union, so between Poland and Ukraine, to welcome and take some, especially mothers with kids, grandmothers, from the border, and they brought them safely to Belgium. They helped them to find housing. And in our parish, we have organized also acquisition of food, of clothes, and of hygienic items in order to supply the immediate urgent needs of those people. And we transformed a hall of our parish into a distribution center in which we had clothes, little toys for children, food, hygienic items, so that these people that just came with small, very small packages from Ukraine could have an initial comfort and assistance. We also have given spiritual assistance. And for example, this family that you see on the left is a large family of Ukrainians, and they didn't make it on time to baptize the baby, so one of our priests baptized their baby. And the particularity of this family is that they are all hearing impaired, they are deaf. So the local authorities in Ukraine have urged them to escape immediately because they couldn't be aware of the danger coming. They couldn't hear, of course, the alarms that were indicating the immediate coming of airplanes, shelling. They couldn't hear the tanks approaching and shooting at buildings. And so they were urged by the local authorities to escape immediately. These people were welcomed by our parish, and they were assisted as we did our best to assist them and many other people. Now, I want to share with you some experiences. These are the first impressions that priests and parishioners that assisted us collected in the behavior of those refugees. First of all, a lot of embarrassment and shame. These people were embarrassed about stepping into the life of the local Belgian people. They tried to do their best to be transparent, to be invisible to us, even to the point of not willing to come to church, not to disturb the routine, our parish life routine. They were embarrassed for taking items that were given to them for free, these clothes, these little toys for the children, some food. They were embarrassed to take them. They wanted to pay for these items, and they were just ashamed of being there. And they also had difficulties in being financially supported by the government. They wanted to work. They wanted to work for money or for free, but just be active and not feeling as a burden on the local population. And the turning point in this was when in our parish we have given them tasks. For example, tasks of many kinds: come sing in our choir, join us in the choir for liturgy, or make coffee, or help us into the catechism of children, and these made them feel immediately integrated, and they started to feel no longer like invaders, but nor guests, but part of us. And this attenuated all the feelings described above. One thing I want to share with you is this. In our distribution center, the thing that struck me the most was when this room was filled with 50, 60 people, I was shocked by the silence. 50, 60 people with their children, picking up these clothes, fitting them a little bit in total silence. And this silence was speaking to me a lot of what was in their souls. Now I want to tell you two stories of about the many interviews that I collected together with my brother priests in our parish. We have S and M, daughter and mother, from Kiev. S works in a bookshop and M is a librarian in a public library. M and her husband are divorced, but they all have, daughter, mother, and father, a good relationship. But the communication between S and her father was interrupted during the war. They don't know about each other anymore since months. S was a child of Chernobyl, and she came many times when she was a little kid to Belgium for many years for regular medical checkups every year. And both came to Belgium in late March, and they were invited by the same Belgian Association of Chernobyl children that were with whom they were in contact for so many years. What happened? M wanted absolutely to stay in Kiev, but S wanted to escape. They had strong arguments. Finally, they decide to leave. S says, the daughter says, that uncertainties of escaping was lighter than the one of staying. M, the mother, says the opposite. In Kiev, they listened to airplanes. It was terrifying at night. They slept during the day. During the shelling, the windows and the whole building were shaking. Several times a day, they had to run with their suitcases in case of evacuation to the basement, sharing it with few hundreds of other people. This was a very big building. But in the basement, they feared the presence of supporters of Russia, so they couldn't speak. There was silence because they were fearful to share their opinions and their feelings in the basement. There was no electricity in the night, no hygiene, total darkness. They were supported by local psychologists, and the psychologists suggested them to keep a routine of daily rituals, going back home, taking a shower, making coffee, cooking a little bit. This was the routine that the local psychologist suggested. One day they met on the street an Ukrainian military officer. It was for them safer to leave immediately, said he. They decided to escape by train to Lviv, then to Poland, then to Germany. They met an unknown person, and this person hosted them for 1 month in her home in Germany. Then they arrived to Brussels. According to them, leaving was not so painful, and the fear turned to relief in the end. They have been hosted by several people in Belgium, but they must keep moving from place to place. They already changed 4 houses. The greatest concern of them is to disturb, interrupt, or intrude in the daily life of the people who host them. Now they are facing 2 possible choices: going back to Kiev or spending their last savings to rent a small apartment and continue to stay in the West. They feel that they live in a suspended atmosphere. Life is frozen in an endless waiting. They are trying to move forward and let life start in their new environment. Their primary goal is that both want to work for money or for free. They want to contribute to the place where they now live. The daughter, S, wants to remain in Belgium, and M, the mother, wants to go back, but wants her daughter to stay. They would separate. This would be painful because this turmoil created a very strong bond, not existing before, apparently, between them. That they find this new bond a true blessing. In summary, the worst psychological moment was under the shelling and bombing. S feels okay to have left, but M still finds it very hard. She could have stayed in Kiev and wishes to go back as soon as it becomes safer. M suffered in Kiev from aggressiveness attacks. Another shorter story. L is a young woman, 25 years old, from Kharkiv. She's a master in applied linguistics. She speaks Russian, Ukrainian, English, and Dutch. She is the daughter of an Ukrainian-Russian family. The father, who died, worked for many years in Siberia. L, Ukrainian, studied in Moscow, where she got her bachelor's and master's degrees. She cannot have a permanent job in Belgium, for example, in the European institutions, because of the strict rules for the non-European Union residents. But she got a temporary job in a company. She works in international marketing and sales with great success. Her mother now lives in Crimea under Russian control. The mother adapted to the situation relatively well and receives a pension. The brother of her was in Kharkiv with wife and children. After a few days of uninterrupted bombing and life in the basement, they escaped to their small hut in the country. They have a tiny little wooden hut in the country, in the western region of Kharkiv. They are still there. Both the brother and his wife lost their jobs, and L sends each month part of her salary to support him and his family, to buy food, to buy wood for the heating, and so on. Actually, the brother and his family, they are refugees in their own land. L was engaged with a Russian student. This Russian student served in the army. The wedding was planned, but at the beginning of the war, some contrasts started to build up when she and her family were under the shelling. He, the fiancé, the Russian fiancé, fully supported the invasion of Ukraine and said that if he were there as soldier, he would fight against the Ukrainians. Elle was devastated and the relationship was broken. Elle expressed her opposition to the war on social media, and she said, I wanted to open the eyes of my friends about the invasions and about the war. She received a threat from a friend in Crimea. The friend knew that his mother was living there, and on her phone one day she saw a message. When you come back to Crimea, let us know. We shall inform the police about you coming. Then the message disappeared from her telephone. Should she be arrested, she may be jailed for up to 15 years for negative propaganda. This makes it impossible for her to visit her mother ever in the future. They are planning to travel pretending to be tourists in a neutral country to meet each other. To conclude, I would like to share with you some signs recorded by us priests and by a psychiatric nurse, that is our parishioner, during conversation and spiritual counseling with these people, signs of trauma. Most of the refugees that we met and we interviewed have nightmares and insomnia. Most of them can sleep only during the day. They are afraid of noise. Any unusual noise is perceived as danger. They are afraid of silence. After experiencing that the silence of the night was too many times abruptly interrupted by bombing, shelling, gunfire. They have bouts of panic, crying, trembling, shouting, and they have bouts of aggressiveness against family members, against friends or neighbors, and also against unknown people. They feel anxiety mainly due to the uncertainties about their future lives. Should we go back? Should we look for housing in Belgium or Ukraine? Should we look for a job? Where in the world? Belgium, Ukraine? Where in Europe? And we registered a de novo usage and in some kind a little bit generation of dependence to antidepressant drugs and anti-anxiety drugs. For the moment, we didn't register any abuse of alcohol, but of course, this is something that people don't share too much with us. So I think my time has finished. I was happy to share with you these experiences. It's not to be generalized what we saw and what we observed, but it is experience that we had and that show and point very clearly to the traumatic aspects of escaping from your own land when you are in a land on war front line, and I thank you very much.